Kevin J. Ayotte was born on May 12, 1979, and his earliest years were defined by quiet routines and closely monitored care. He was a young child with blonde hair and bright blue eyes, a distinctive appearance accompanied by significant developmental challenges that shaped his daily life. Kevin was hearing impaired and possessed very limited speech abilities, conditions that required consistent attention and careful supervision. These limitations placed him in a vulnerable position, especially in unfamiliar or uncontrolled environments. At the time preceding his disappearance, Kevin lived in a rural cabin in Sugar Bush Township, Minnesota, alongside his mother, Joanne, and his two older brothers. The family structure had already undergone change as Kevin's parents were divorced. His father no longer resided in the household and instead lived in Minneapolis, approximately 230 miles south of the township. This geographic separation positioned Kevin primarily under the care and responsibility of his mother within an isolated setting. Sugar Bush Township itself was characterized by its remoteness and sparse population, reinforcing the sense of isolation surrounding the family's residence. The area was known for its simplicity and limited number of permanent residents, creating an environment that was peaceful yet logistically challenging for emergencies or rapid response situations. The distance from larger populated centers and the absence of dense community infrastructure contributed to the quiet and secluded nature of Kevin's surroundings. Kevin's small stature, developmental delays, and dependence on adult supervision further underscored the seriousness of any lapse in oversight. His inability to hear or communicate clearly restricted his capability to seek help or signal distress if separated from familiar individuals. These factors, taken together, emphasize the critical importance of direct supervision and structured routines in his everyday life. Within this environment, Kevin's life followed a simple pattern centered around his immediate family and the limited space of his remote home. His condition required that those around him remain attentive to his whereabouts and safety at all times. Every element of his situation, from his physical characteristics to the geographic isolation of his residence, contributed to an increased level of risk. This factual foundation establishes who Kevin was before he vanished and clarifies the circumstances that made his disappearance particularly alarming and difficult to address. The narrative of his early life therefore rests on documented characteristics and observable conditions rather than imagined interpretation. Kevin's presence in this protected yet isolated home environment illustrates the routine reality experienced by young children requiring specialized care. His limited communication ability meant that his understanding of danger and safe boundaries depended almost entirely upon those supervising him. The physical remoteness of Sugar Bush Township amplified the importance of local awareness and direct observation, as assistance was not immediately accessible. This combination of personal vulnerability and geographic seclusion formed the precise context in which his later disappearance would occur, providing an factual baseline for understanding the gravity. Sugar Bush Township, located in Beltrami County, Minnesota, is defined by its remote and sparsely inhabited landscape, an area measuring approximately 31.5 square miles, with a recorded population of only 121 residents, according to the 1980 census. This environment is characterized by expansive dense forests, limited residential development, and a notable absence of concentrated community infrastructure. The terrain during the period of Kevin's disappearance presented an isolated setting where visibility was naturally restricted and access routes were limited. The township's natural composition is dominated by thick wooded areas, scattered clearings, and numerous bodies of water that create an uneven and obstructed landscape. Within this space exist 9 lakes, along with surrounding bogs and marsh-like ground that complicate movement and navigation. These elements combine to form an environment where orientation becomes challenging, particularly for anyone unfamiliar with the terrain or unable to communicate effectively. Minimal habitation across the township meant substantial distances between occupied properties, resulting in large unmonitored spaces where foot traffic was rare and natural growth remained largely undisturbed. This sparse distribution of residences contributed to the difficulty of conducting extensive visual scanning or maintaining consistent oversight across the region. The landscape itself offered countless locations where a small child could wander without notice and remain concealed from immediate view. The geographic isolation of Sugar Bush Township directly influenced the nature of any potential search operations. The absence of dense population centers, combined with vast stretches of uninterrupted wilderness, reduced the likelihood of spontaneous detection or rapid response. Thick vegetation limited sightlines, while boggy terrain restricted safe traversal and slowed coordinated movement through affected areas. In this setting, the complexity of locating a missing individual increased significantly. The environment did not provide clear boundaries or defined pathways that could easily direct investigative focus. Instead, the natural features encouraged dispersion, allowing extensive zones where a child could move beyond immediate visibility and remain undetected within moments. The remoteness of the township intensified the urgency of any developing situation. With limited accessibility and few direct observation points, the task of identifying specific search zones became complicated and methodical. Geographic conditions demanded heightened attention and persistent effort, as every element of the surroundings posed obstacles to efficient navigation. These environmental characteristics illustrate why Sugar Bush Township presented exceptional challenges once Kevin vanished. The isolated nature of the region and its dense, obstructive terrain created circumstances where rapid location was not only difficult, but inherently uncertain. This physical reality shaped the investigative approach, reinforcing the role geography played in complicating efforts to find any trace of Kevin within the expansive and secluded landscape. Every detail of this setting reflects a geography that influenced visibility, movement, and investigative precision. The natural layout imposed physical barriers that limited coverage, slowed systematic efforts, and required coordination. These spatial conditions remain central to understanding the difficulties experienced by authorities attempting to navigate and examine the township effectively. Kevin's disappearance unfolded during the late afternoon hours of the day his older brothers returned home from school at approximately 4:30 p.m. Inside the family residence, Kevin was observed interacting normally as he helped his brother Terry make a bed in one of the upstairs rooms. After this brief activity, Kevin moved into his mother's room, where he continued occupying himself quietly by playing with toys within the familiar indoor environment. According to Joanne's account, she placed a shoe and a sock back onto Kevin before he followed his brothers toward the interior of the home. She then stepped outside to tend to window work, leaving Kevin unattended for roughly 3 minutes. When she re-entered the cabin, Kevin was no longer visible in any immediate area. His sudden absence was unexpected given the short time frame and the limited distance he could typically travel without guidance. Terry attempted to locate Kevin after noticing he was not in their mother's room where he had last been seen. He searched nearby spaces and then informed Joanne that Kevin could not be found inside the residence. Together, they checked surrounding areas, calling out and scanning the rooms and property for any sign of his presence, but there was no response or indication of where he had gone. Recognizing the seriousness of the situation, Joanne contacted their cousin, Mike Steele, requesting assistance in the search efforts. Mike arrived to help them continue looking, focusing on the immediate vicinity of the home and any nearby paths Kevin might have entered. Despite these efforts, Kevin remained missing and could not be located through the initial search. It was also determined that Kevin's 6-month-old Springer Spaniel puppy, Flash, was not present within the home or its immediate surroundings. The absence of the dog was recorded as part of the sequence of events and noted as a factual element related to the timeline of Kevin's disappearance. No interpretation was applied to this detail, and it remained a simple observation. As daylight diminished and continued efforts yielded no results, the decision was made to involve law enforcement authorities formally. At approximately 7:00 p.m., a missing person report was filed with the Beltrami County Sheriff's Office. This action marked the official beginning of the investigative process into Kevin's disappearance, establishing documented recognition that he could not be located through family search efforts alone. This report formalized the circumstance as a verified missing child case and transferred responsibility from informal family searching to structured official action. From that moment forward, the timeline of the evening became a documented sequence defining the moment Kevin could no longer be accounted for. The transition from household concern to institutional response reflected the precise point when the family acknowledged that ordinary efforts were insufficient to determine his location within the immediate residential area. Every written detail preserved the chronology without assumption or interpretation. Law enforcement initiated an immediate response following the formal missing person report, quickly organizing search operations that began with approximately 30 individuals assigned to locate Kevin. This initial group included officers and local participants who coordinated efforts across the immediate area surrounding the residence. As the seriousness of the situation became increasingly evident, additional personnel were summoned to assist, and the search operation expanded in size and geographic coverage. Search teams moved methodically through dense, wooded areas, carefully navigating icy bogs and uneven rocky creeks that define the surrounding terrain. These natural obstacles complicated movement and visibility, slowing progress and limiting the effectiveness of standard search methods. Conditions worsened as nighttime temperatures rapidly declined, reaching nearly 30 degrees Fahrenheit, further intensifying concerns for Kevin's safety and survival. Investigators were acutely aware of Kevin's inadequate clothing and the physical limitations associated with his hearing impairment. His inability to hear verbal calls or directional cues reduced the likelihood that conventional search tactics would immediately yield results. This heightened awareness informed the cautious and systematic approach adopted by those involved in the effort. The presence of Kevin's young dog was regarded as a potential advantage during these early stages. It was hoped that the animal's natural behavior might assist searchers by guiding them toward Kevin or indicating his last known path of movement. This expectation reflected a practical consideration rather than an assumption, grounded in the possibility that the dog might remain near him. Despite sustained effort and organized movement through difficult terrain, no visible trace of Kevin or his personal belongings was discovered before morning. Search teams continued operating under increasingly challenging environmental conditions, with focus directed toward areas most immediately accessible from the home. However, visibility remained limited, and the uneven ground constrained thorough inspection. As the hours progressed and temperatures remained low, concern intensified regarding Kevin's potential exposure to harsh outdoor conditions. The absence of a clear lead or physical evidence contributed to growing apprehension about his ability to endure prolonged exposure without adequate protection or shelter. This concern was based on observable environmental realities and known physical limitations. By the time daylight approached, it was evident that the initial response, though extensive and focused, had not produced any indication of Kevin's location. The operation reflected determined effort measured against formidable natural barriers. Every factor, from temperature to terrain, demonstrated the significant challenges faced by those conducting the search and underscored the gravity of the situation confronting law enforcement and search participants alike. Throughout these initial hours, coordination remained continuous and structured, emphasizing coverage consistency and deliberate pacing. Teams maintained communication while adjusting routes to account for physical hazards and declining light conditions. Each decision reflected procedural urgency tempered by safety awareness, reinforcing the depth of the organized response. The combined effort illustrated how environmental difficulty shaped strategy and limited immediate success during the critical early phase of the search. Search efforts expanded over the following days, increasing from an initial group of dozens to an operation involving hundreds of participants. It was during this period that more than 200 officials and volunteers joined the coordinated mission to locate Kevin across the surrounding terrain. Helicopters equipped with thermoscan devices were deployed to assist in identifying possible body heat readings obscured beneath dense foliage. These aerial tools provided expanded visibility, yet dense canopy and complex ground formations limited detection reliability. During this intensified phase, poor weather repeatedly disrupted progress and forced temporary suspensions of active searching. Cold temperatures and steady rainfall created difficult conditions, reducing accessibility and slowing detailed examination of targeted zones. Despite continued effort, nearby trails, bridges, and areas previously known to have been wandered by Kevin produced no evidence. Searchers methodically combed these locations, maintaining consistent procedures and coordinated communication throughout each systematic sweep. Repeated failure to locate any indication of Kevin intensified concern among officials regarding the vast size of the search area. Statements from law enforcement reflected recognition that such expansive terrain significantly reduced survival prospects for a young child. As hours turned into days without progress, perception gradually shifted from an accidental, wandering scenario toward possible abduction consideration. This transition occurred only after repeated unsuccessful searches failed to provide physical confirmation of his location. Even as concern increased, investigative protocols remained structured and deliberate, emphasizing procedural consistency rather than speculative deviation. The evolving operation reflected heightened urgency, balanced by disciplined methodology and adherence to defined search standards. Every adjustment to strategy remained grounded in physical terrain assessment, weather observation, and logistical feasibility factors. Participants expanded coverage while preserving organized structure and measured movement through increasingly challenging conditions. The continued absence of results reinforced the complexity of the situation and underscored the severity of the unfolding circumstances. Still, coordinated efforts persisted as teams remained committed to methodical examination across all designated areas. Each passing hour demonstrated the demanding nature of the undertaking and the operational strain placed upon resources. Search expansion therefore illustrated the intersection of urgency, logistics, and environmental constraint within a formally directed investigation. These sustained measures clarified the procedural depth applied while emphasizing the difficulty of achieving immediate resolution. The operation stood as a demonstration of organized persistence, executed amid continuous obstacles and limited leads. Visibility challenges, unstable terrain, and unpredictable weather collectively influenced decision-making and search coverage planning. Authorities maintained precise documentation of search zones and participant deployment throughout the ongoing effort. The absence of tangible findings sustained official apprehension while reinforcing commitment to continued exploration. This phase of the search therefore demonstrated structured escalation without divergence from disciplined investigative convention. Responsibility remained focused on systematic coverage, evaluated adaptation, and accountable procedural execution across all participating units. The prolonged effort clearly illustrated how environmental conditions dictated pace, visibility, and achievable outcomes within the formally organized continuing investigation phase at present. Flash reappeared on October 5, 1982, emerging alone from a field across the road from the family's home, marking the first tangible development since Kevin's disappearance. The dog appeared hungry, but otherwise physically unharmed, a condition carefully observed and documented by those present. This unexpected return generated cautious optimism among those involved, as Flash's earlier absence had been directly linked to Kevin's disappearance. Authorities immediately conducted physical examinations of the dog, focusing on identifying any possible clues that might indicate where he had been or what had occurred. A thorough inspection of Flash's fur and body was performed to detect trace evidence, but nothing of relevance was discovered. His stomach was pumped to determine what he had consumed, and the only material recovered was swamp grass, providing no meaningful direction or actionable detail. With limited options available, investigators attempted to use Flash as a tracking tool in hopes that his natural instinct might lead them to Kevin's location. A tracking device was attached and the dog was released in various controlled areas surrounding the property. Despite these efforts, Flash consistently returned directly to the family cabin, repeating the same route without deviation or indication of any alternative destination. Each attempt reinforced the absence of directional guidance, eliminating the possibility that the dog could provide effective assistance in identifying Kevin's whereabouts. The process remained methodical and measured, rooted in observed behavior rather than speculation or interpretive conclusion. Flash's response did not change across repeated trials, and no environmental indicators emerged to support further tracking attempts. Although his return initially suggested potential advancement within the investigation, it ultimately failed to yield progress or credible leads. The event served only to confirm that Flash had not remained with Kevin or provided evidence of his movement after leaving the home. This outcome maintained the uncertainty that defined the case, offering no clarification regarding Kevin's path or current status. The moment represented a documented occurrence rather than a resolution, reinforcing the ongoing absence of concrete evidence. Flash's physical reappearance established a new point within the investigative timeline while simultaneously highlighting its limitations. The failure to derive useful information from his condition or behavior underscored the continued complexity surrounding Kevin's disappearance. This development, although recorded and briefly hopeful, resulted in no new conclusions or discoveries, leaving investigators without additional direction in their search. Observers noted that every procedural step taken regarding Flash adhered strictly to investigative standards, ensuring that each action remained consistent with established search methodologies. His return was logged as a marker, yet its limited utility became apparent once examinations produced no actionable outcomes. The absence of guidance reaffirmed the uncertainty surrounding Kevin's disappearance. Despite thorough handling, repeated releases, and consistent monitoring, Flash's behavior yielded no shift in investigative direction. The situation therefore remained unresolved, with this development standing as a moment of hope that failed to alter the evidentiary status of the case. Authorities gradually shifted their assessment of Kevin's disappearance toward classification as a non-family abduction following repeated unsuccessful searches and the absence of physical evidence within the surrounding area. This transition occurred as investigative efforts expanded beyond immediate environmental factors and focused increasingly on the possibility of external human involvement. Search activity extended to interviews and examinations involving local residents and registered offenders, ensuring that individuals within the region were carefully assessed through methodical inquiry. These procedures reflected a structured attempt to identify any potential connection between Kevin's disappearance and persons who might have had proximity or opportunity. Despite this broad scope, no reliable leads emerged from these interviews or background examinations. Kevin's biological father was evaluated during this stage and subsequently eliminated as a suspect based on verified alibi confirmation and the successful completion of a polygraph test. Investigators found no evidence linking him to the case, and his removal from suspicion was formally recognized within the investigative process. This determination further narrowed viable theories but did not produce actionable direction. The investigation also incorporated collaboration with federal authorities, including involvement from agencies such as the FBI and the CIA. These organizations assisted in the expanded investigative review, contributing resources and procedural support in evaluating potential causes and suspects. Hundreds of individuals were questioned during this extended phase, but these efforts failed to identify any person who could be conclusively connected to Kevin's disappearance. No verified suspect was ever formally charged or identified, and this absence of definitive findings underscored the uncertainty surrounding the case. Investigators repeatedly revisited lines of inquiry while maintaining consistent documentation, reflecting an ongoing process of investigative repetition rather than resolution. Every potential avenue explored was recorded, yet none produced conclusive evidence. This period was characterized by continued exploration of multiple theories while remaining grounded in verifiable information. Law enforcement maintained the official stance that human involvement was likely, although such involvement could not be proven with existing evidence. The classification of the case as a non-family abduction reflected procedural judgment rather than definitive factual confirmation. Throughout this phase, authorities preserved a methodical approach, ensuring that investigative steps adhered to established standards without deviation into unsupported speculation. The process emphasized persistence in critical evaluation, highlighting the complexity of the situation despite substantial effort. Reassessment of collected information occurred repeatedly, yet clarity remained beyond reach. The resulting classification therefore stood as an informed conclusion shaped by elimination rather than discovery. Investigators acknowledged the absence of concrete proof while continuing structured evaluation of the case. This stage demonstrated how prolonged uncertainty and investigative strain defined the case's evolving status, reinforcing the difficulty of establishing certainty where physical evidence and credible testimony were unavailable. Despite continued procedural diligence, the investigative atmosphere remained defined by unanswered questions and cautious interpretation, reflecting an environment where determination persisted, but resolution remained unattained. reinforcing the complexity surrounding Kevin's unexplained disappearance within investigative frameworks. Kevin's case entered later stages, marked by continued visibility through national awareness efforts and ongoing investigative classification. His disappearance was included in the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children Milk Carton campaign, ensuring his image and identifying information reached households across the country. Age progression representations were created over time to reflect how Kevin might appear as he grew older, supporting broader recognition efforts without altering the factual status of the case. These measures were intended to sustain public awareness while reinforcing the unresolved nature of his disappearance. In 2011, an identity misuse incident emerged in Michigan when a man was discovered using Kevin's personal identifying information. Further investigation confirmed that this individual was not Kevin, and the discovery did not alter the official understanding of the case. Authorities documented the findings carefully and continued to maintain active status for the investigation. Investigators have consistently stated that Kevin's disappearance remains open and assigned, with dedicated personnel continuing to monitor available information and incoming tips. This position reflects ongoing procedural commitment despite the absence of verified developments. Joanne's continued remembrance of her son has also been acknowledged within the documentation of the case. Her references to Kevin remain part of recorded statements that illustrate the prolonged impact of his unresolved disappearance. Law enforcement has reiterated that Kevin's status is formally classified as unresolved. Officials continue to request public assistance and encourage the submission of any information considered relevant to his disappearance. Distinguishing features and identifying details remain part of the official appeal statements distributed by authorities. Contact information has been provided consistently to support the reporting of tips related to the case. These efforts maintain a factual and procedural framework centered on continued investigation. No verified explanation has been established regarding Kevin's disappearance. His fate remains officially unknown within investigative records. The absence of conclusive evidence continues to define the final status of this case. Authorities emphasize continued vigilance while reaffirming that the investigation remains active and unresolved. Public communications emphasize that any credible information may contribute to further evaluation and potential progress. This reaffirmed position ensures the case remains visible within official archives and public channels. Despite passage of time, investigative documentation continues to reflect active oversight. Each new entry is reviewed within established procedural standards. The unresolved designation remains consistent across all current references to Kevin's disappearance. Formal classification reflects the absence of confirmed closure. Officials maintain disciplined review processes to ensure accuracy and accountability. This approach preserves integrity within the investigative record. Kevin's case remains an ongoing matter of documented concern. Continued appeals remain active for information from the public. Law enforcement reinforces the importance of cooperation and credible reporting. The narrative therefore concludes with acknowledged uncertainty and procedural continuation. No definitive outcome has been recorded within official case summary to date. Kevin's disappearance remains unresolved and under continued formal review by authorities today without resolution confirmed.